This guide is intended to provide you with basic tips which will allow you to succeed in undergraduate essay writing. If you follow the advice presented here, your essays will probably be quite good. If you don't, they might still be alright, but they probably won't be as good as they could have been. Follow it if you want, it's your choice, I'm not forcing you, I'm not your dad. Here's the TLDR for the terminally lazy. Number 1. Find 10 to 20 relevant books and articles from the reading list and or Google Scholar or Web of Science or Scopus searches. Well-referenced Wikipedia or Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy articles will also be your friends for both understanding and writing about a topic. Read and cite the references, not the articles themselves, obviously. Number 2, skim the relevant sections of those articles for relevant quotes. Number 3, write down those relevant quotes. Number 4, have a think, put the argument together and write your essay. Number 5, your essay is done. Obviously, this doesn't cover everything, and that is what the next 2,000 words are for, so stop being so lazy. Part 1. Reading. In summary, read the reading list, don't read books cover to cover, find additional articles in bibliographies of reading list articles, skim the abstracts for relevance, write down notes of page numbers and quotes, and read critically. The foundation of any good essay is a solid set of references. This isn't just so that you can look good and your tutor thinks you've done the reading. It's because no matter how clever you are and what percentile of the country you came in your school leaving exams, your ideas still aren't original. Trust me. You might think that you're the first person to discover moral relativism, or the situationist perspective on human behaviour, or discursive constructions. Spoilers. You're not. Someone has done it before, and they've almost certainly done it better. That's not to say that you can't have really cool ideas, or express those ideas in interesting ways. You just need to make sure that you cite the people who came up with those ideas originally, and ideally, show how you differ from or improve upon them. And the only way you can do this, and consequently the only really good way to get a decent mark, is to do some reading. Step 1. Look at the reading list. If it's incredibly long, you probably won't want to or be able to read it all. However, that is not an excuse to not read any of it. Look through the list, identify if there are any readings marked as essential, read them. If there aren't any essential readings, pick a few which look interesting and relevant, then read them. Step 2. Read some more. If the reading list is really short, you'll need to go beyond it. If it's long, this is still relevant. Look through the reference lists of the papers and the books you've just read. See where the ideas came from. Mark out a few of the most promising looking readings. Read the abstracts of them, and if they're relevant to you, read the rest of them. If they're not, discard them. Step 3. There is a difference between reading to understand the topic and reading that you plan to reference. It is totally fine to use Wikipedia or Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or lecture notes to familiarise yourself with the key arguments and concepts. It is considerably less fine to cite them. Step 4. Books. Don't read whole books. It's a waste of your time. You won't remember any of it, it will drain all of your energy, and you only get one reference and one viewpoint out of it. Read the intro and the conclusion so you get the gist of their argument. Pick a chapter from the contents page which looks like it's relevant to your essay. Read that. As above, find the relevant references from those pieces as well and follow them up. Step 5. Articles. Read the abstract first. Does it look like it's relevant? If not, don't waste your time. If it does, read it. Check the bibliography as above for more references. And step 6, and this is important, read critically. For the sake of all that is holy, read critically. This is absolutely essential. Don't just stare at the pages and absorb them bovine-like for the purposes of regurgitating into your essay. Think about 1. The central claim the author is making. Usually there is only 1, perhaps 2. Summarise it in 1 sentence if you can. 2. What is the frame of their argument? When in history is it set? Who are the key actors? Are they responding to another author? If so, what's the argument they're responding to? Try to position their argument in context. That allows you to 3. Critically assess the claims that they make. This obviously doesn't just mean say they're wrong, They might well be wrong, but you'll need to find reasons for it. Generate a list of 3 reasons for each line of attack you want to take, scrap the weakest 2. If you think they're right, why are they right? Are there other authors who corroborate their claims? Are there logical reasons to prefer their argument? Make sure you take notes on everything you read. Put page numbers in these notes. In fact, write down a few potentially useful and ideally flexible quotes verbatim. Using them makes it look like you've actually read the text rather than just picking a page at random and hoping that it happens to contain the right argument, or that your examiner doesn't know the literature at all well. I still handwrite quotes in my notes, and I'm working on my PhD thesis right now. There aren't many ways in which I'd recommend being like me. This is one of them. You don't want to get penalised because you didn't reference your readings properly after you put in all that effort to make sure that your arguments are founded in the literature. Part 2. Answering the question. In summary, identify key terms in the question, define those terms, and question the question. That is, what are the underlying assumptions behind it? Some questions are straightforward. They might ask you to critically assess some claim or concept, or ask you a simple question which you'll have to answer in a complex way. Other questions aren't so simple. They'll make a statement and tell you to discuss it. They might ask you to compare and contrast 2 different ideas, or say which of 2 theories is the more accurate. We'll talk about both types of questions here. Step 1. Identify the key terms in the question. If the question is, what is the best solution to the demarcation problem, you're going to want to identify what you think the examiner means by the terms solution and demarcation problem. How are you going to define and operationalize those terms in your essay? And that's essential, because your argument has to have a clear definition of the terms you're using in order for it to be coherent and responsive. That doesn't mean you should use lazy constructions like, I am going to define demarcation problem as the question of how we can define science. That's a perfectly reasonable definition if you can defend it, and you should give a reason you've chosen a certain definition. But you need to be a little less clunky. Something like, when we talk about the problem of demarcation, we refer to the question of how exactly we can define science as a sphere of human activity which is somehow special. We'll do just fine. Step 2. Question the question. You'll hear this quite a lot, and you'll probably wonder what the hell it means. It's important to understand it because it can be the key to getting a high mark. Every term in a question is ambiguous. Every question has hidden assumptions behind it. You can question those assumptions. For example, in the question about the demarcation problem above, there are assumptions that there is a single problem of demarcation, as well as a single best solution to that problem. Sometimes it's enough to point out that these assumptions exist, and then to proceed with the essay by clarifying the definitions you're using and the assumptions you're working with. Sometimes you might think that the assumptions are fundamentally mistaken, or disguise a more important question. In that case, you'll need to point this out, and then proceed to explain why, and to make your arguments within the essay using your revised understanding of the question. Step 3. If the question is X statement, discuss, then you have, broadly, 4 options on how to answer it. Try not to hedge your bets. It isn't AS level critical thinking. You don't need to give both sides equal weighting and say, oh, it's a really tricky question and there are great arguments on both sides. Have opinions. Option 1 is this is true and that's great. Option 2 is this is true and that's awful. Option 3 is this isn't true and it should be true. And option 4 is this isn't true and that's fine. Step 4. How are you going to relate your argument to the existing literature? Who are the key authors you plan to draw on? Make sure you know their arguments reasonably well and have armed yourself with flexible quotes from their work. If you can, familiarise yourself with the people who think they're wrong and awful. Figure out if there are arguments which are unresolved and see if you can make a contribution towards resolving them. Once you've clarified all the terms, you can start to put together your arguments and write the essay. Part 3. Structure. In summary, tell me everything you're going to say in your introduction, structure your points like you're in primary school, and don't bring new material into your conclusion. 99% of the structure of your essay is exactly the same as you learned in secondary school. You might think you're too good for point, evidence, explain. You're not. Especially if you think you are. On introductions, start your intro with the central claim of your essay. If I'm reading it, I want to know within literally 5 seconds what you're trying to convince me of. Next, think about what you need to prove in order to make that claim. What might be the immediate negative reaction of someone reading your central claim? How can you defend yourself against that response? Ideally, You want to be able to split your burdens of proof, that is, the things you need to prove in order for your argument to be true, into a few different points. And those points will be your paragraphs. 2. From here, write down what you're going to argue and in what order. It is genuinely fine, indeed good, to say, first I will prove X, next I'll go on to show that Y, finally, drawing on blogs, 1999, I will argue that Z. The final part of your introduction should tell me what conclusions you're going to draw, or at the very least say, I conclude by examining the implications of my argument for this theory or this author or this other argument. That is to say, if you've been taught that your essay should unravel as you go, and I shouldn't understand your whole argument until the very end, then you've been taught wrong. Don't do it. I should know exactly what you're going to argue by the time I finish your introduction. This isn't an Agatha Christie novel, it's an argument. Save the twists and turns. When thinking about your argument in the introduction, consider the tips above regarding questioning the question and defining terms. You can either do this within the confines of the introduction, or you can say something to the effect of, first, I will define what it would mean to be able to solve the problem of demarcation, querying the definitions of these terms and showing how their intrinsic ambiguities may create difficulties in argument. Next, let's look at the body. And here I say you should pee on your essay. And it sounds infantile, and it is infantile, but you should do it anyway. First, the point. What are you claiming? This is also known as the topic sentence. At the end of the first sentence of each paragraph, I should know what to expect from that paragraph. Don't tantalize the examiner. It's an essay, not a terrible surprise birthday party. Then, the evidence. Who has said this thing before you said it? How are you corroborating the point you're trying to make? And please don't just say, oh, I just thought of it. Find someone who said it or something like it before. Are there statistics which back up your argument? If so, where are they from? If there's more than one piece of evidence, even better. Third, explain. Why does the evidence you presented prove the point you're trying to make? And I'll go into that part of arguing more in the next section. And one final thing, in most essays, there should be a development of thought from one paragraph to the next. In some instances, your arguments may genuinely be discrete units, but in most instances, they should flow in some way. Try and play around with your structure such that your body paragraphs are in the order that best allows the essay to feel fluent and smooth. Finally, the conclusion. Don't put new things in your conclusion. It's not big, it's not clever. We're not just saying this for our health. If you're adding new arguments in your conclusion, it's not a conclusion, it's another body paragraph. Instead, first, recapitulate your argument. Readers are stupid and they have terrible memories. What did you prove in your essay? How did you prove it? It's like doing your introduction all over again, but with slightly nicer words and with the benefit of hindsight. Second, synthesize your claims. What are the implications of what you've proved? Do the strands of your argument come together to prove that, I don't know, Immanuel Kant was full of nonsense when he wrote the Critique of Pure Reason? Do they leave the field open for a new line of inquiry into the semiotics of phallic imagery and male-female initiation messages on contemporary dating applications? Why should we care about the things you've written? Repeat your central claim, tell me why you've proven it. Synthesis often involves thinking about the state of your field or of a society at that moment and trying to show how your argument might apply or might be useful elsewhere. It means bringing together all the things that you proved to make more far-reaching points. But don't overreach. This isn't going to change the face of your subject forever, and you look quite silly if you try and say that. Part 4. Analysis. In summary, why is it true? Why is it important? With respect to structure, you make a claim, then there's a counterclaim, and then you rebut that counterclaim. But don't be mean to your opponents. Analysis is the stuff that actually makes up your argument. If you perform poorly at this, then you might as well pack up and go home. But fortunately, it's really not particularly difficult. First step, why is the thing you're saying true? If you're making a claim, you need to tell me why that claim is correct. Think of a potential response to your argument, perhaps from an author you're arguing against. Write out that response. Then, tell me why it doesn't defeat your argument, or at least why it only mitigates it. Number 2, why is it important? In the context of the question you're answering and the frame you provided for your argument, why should I care about the point you're making at this point in the essay? Once you've proven, using the P format, that your argument stands, I want to know the significance of it. Number 3, structuring your arguments. And to create a really decent paragraph, you ideally want to follow one of two structures. Remember that at each step within each structure, you need to use P. It's like a set of Matryoshka dolls. Option 1 is claim, counterclaim, rebuild the claim. Option 2 is have a foil, that is the claim you're arguing against, and then you refute it, that's your reasoning as to why they're mistaken, and then there's a rebuttal, which is their plausible response to your argument, and then finally you re-refute it, finally putting their argument to bed. Finally, make sure you formulate every claim in the strongest possible terms. Don't make your opponent look like they have no arguments or take the weakest version of their argument. Think about the strongest possible response to the claim you put forward, then beat it. It will make your argument stronger. If you can't beat it, then you can find another argument, or you can concede some of the ground and show why their claim might make some limited headway into beating you, but that ultimately there's some stuff still left standing. Part 5. Using evidence. In summary, get referencing software like Zotero. Reference properly, cite the originator of the idea, and go beyond the reading list. Okay, so at this point you've written an incredible essay. You're ready to hand it in, you're going to get an 80. But not so fast. Your reference list is a mess, you haven't cited half your sources, and half your bibliography is Wikipedia pages. So how to reference is totally dependent on your department and your university, and they'll likely have provided you a style guide. You should read it and then follow it, and then you won't lose marks. But you should also make sure that when you're citing, you cite the original person who came up with the idea, not the random person who's also citing them. And that's a pretty classic error. You should also get referencing software. I use Zotero, which is free. You can also use Mendeley or EndNote. You will save yourself literally days over the course of your university career. They allow you to reference as you write, and you can create and reformat your bibliography and citations at the touch of a button. If you don't do this, then you really only have yourself to blame when you're spending the last days of your undergraduate degree desperately trying to find books on Google so that you can write down their details by hand. You should make sure also to go beyond the reading list. It's the single easiest way to get more marks. If I see an argument citing an author who nobody else has mentioned, and it's a decent argument, and it's an author in a peer-reviewed journal or in a book, it will make my day. Genuinely, I have a very sad life. And finally here, you should critically engage. Be aware whilst you're reading that all arguments and all authors are fallible. Think about the text you're reading. Think about how you might respond to it. And finally, in part 6, I want to give some general tips. The first thing is that there's a litmus test for whether your argument is pernicious nonsense. See if you can summarise it to a friend who's in a different subject area. If you can't, it's probably not because they're stupid. It's probably because it's a bad argument or you don't quite understand it. Second, read over your introduction when you're done. Does it still make sense? Often your argument will change over the course of an essay, and you'll need to alter your introduction accordingly. Have you supported every argument that you've made? If not, sort that out. Third, once you've written the whole essay, read it over again. Look at every premise you've used and claim that you've made. And then finally, a few life tips here. And these are ideal habits. Don't do all-nighters. They'll mess up your sleep pattern, you'll ruin your entire next day, and you'll likely produce work that a 5-year-old will be quick to disown. Do your essays on time or do them early if you can. Once you've done your essay early, leave it a day or two. Come back to it. Proofread it. Don't just look for typos. Are you still sure your argument makes sense? If not, rewrite the relevant parts. And third, lots of people say that you should write in chunks of 500 words as you're reading, and that is one perfectly legitimate way of doing things, and it works for some people. I personally prefer a different method, which is I spend the first few days of my week reading and making notes, and then I spend a bit of time thinking over my argument, and I write the whole thing in a day or so. And I likely find this easiest because I can sort of get into the rhythm of it. And then I take a day off, and then I come back, and then I proofread it before I hand it in. One final thing. It bears repeating that your ideas are not new, but that is also okay. Unless you're working on a master's thesis, or at the very least your final undergraduate dissertation, it is vanishingly unlikely that you are the first person to think a particular thought and publish it. What you can do is synthesize old ideas into interesting arguments. Do that, get good marks, be briefly happy.